Claire, this lying woman, this lying cheater. She won't escape the consequences this time. I'm furious, even more angry at myself for being so easily deceived and trusting everyone else. What I needed was proof. She couldn't have half the house. It rightfully belongs to me. I am so annoyed by people who use kindness and trust. Now everything will be different. I encountered Claire while attending university. At the time, I was studying electrical engineering and aeronautics, whereas she was pursuing psychology and social sciences. Our introduction took place at a party, during which I was grappling with a mixture of melancholy and guilt. The recent passing of my Nan weighed heavily on me, especially considering my sparse visits to her over the past few years, consumed as I was by the hectic life of a young university student. Despite this, she left me her modest yet sufficient house in her will, as my parents had no need for it. Fond memories of the house, and of my Nan and Granddad before his passing, lingered in my mind. During my childhood, I frequently visited my Nan to keep her company after Granddad's death, gradually taking on more responsibilities around the house as I grew older. Even amidst the distractions of childhood play, I always made time for her. Upon returning to the house after her funeral, I discovered the Airfix Beaufighter kit I had assembled 15 years prior, my very first model airplane still intact. While I couldn't alter the past frequency of my visits, the sight stirred feelings of guilt and sadness within me. Claire and I had crossed paths on campus. She had an appealing demeanor, and we exchanged nods and smiles whenever we met. At a party, she noticed my somber mood and made an effort to uplift my spirits, which succeeded to some extent. I expressed my gratitude the next day by inviting her for a drink, which extended to dinner, albeit just fish and chips. Within 6 weeks, our relationship had progressed to intimacy, which was satisfying for both of us. Despite our shared university experience and respective romantic encounters, we never broached the topic. One morning, as I woke up in bed, I found Claire gazing down at me with a smile, propped up on one elbow. After planting a kiss on my cheek, she mentioned preparing tea and slipped into one of my dress shirts from the end of the bed. I couldn't help but wonder, as I met her gaze, if there was a hint of affection or love in her eyes. I was beginning to develop emotions for her. There was no beating around the bush. I needed to confront her about it. I headed downstairs, feeling famished after our adventures from last night. I prepared a bacon sandwich for her and a bacon and egg one for myself. As she sat across from me, she seemed lost in thought, distant. I reached out to her, and she looked at me with a smile. Seizing the moment, I confessed, "Sweetheart, there's something important I need to tell you. I'm starting to develop strong feelings for you." Her reaction was unexpected. She leaped up, circled the table, and sat on my lap. It was slightly uncomfortable since she wasn't wearing underwear. I wasn't fully aroused, but not entirely soft either. She took my face in her hands and kissed me passionately. "Thank goodness for that. I love you too. I was just figuring out how to tell you without scaring you away." Even though I hadn't explicitly mentioned love, I let it slide. "So, does this mean we're exclusive now?" I inquired, mindful of our respective backgrounds. "I've been exclusive since we met at that party," she replied. I couldn't make the same claim, but I had been committed since the first time we were intimate. Within 2 weeks, she had moved into my cramped apartment. We struggled to focus on our studies. Living together, being together, I fell deeply and passionately in love with her. The future posed a bit of a dilemma. I had a job waiting for me in my hometown at my dad's company, and I had my grandmother's old house to live in. Claire's hometown was 70 miles away. Upon returning to her parents' place, she swiftly secured a position at a prominent insurance company with branches nationwide. We spent alternate weekends commuting along the M4, becoming intimately acquainted with every pothole along the route. Then serendipity struck. The deputy manager of her company in my town announced retirement, and upon learning of our connection, her company arranged an interview for her. She performed admirably and was offered the position, which she accepted. Consequently, Claire will be relocating to my hometown in approximately 3 months. This timing was perfect, as I had proposed to her. and we were planning a May wedding at our local church, adorned with blossoming cherry trees casting natural confetti. Everything seemed idyllic until I made a discovery. Claire's birthday fell on the Friday. I was scheduled to visit her. Taking a day off, I journeyed to her place on Thursday night to surprise her, armed with a dozen roses. Arriving at her flat, I noticed her car parked in its usual spot, but the apartment was dark. Letting myself in, I found no trace of her. Perhaps she had stepped out for errands. I arranged the roses in a vase and brewed a cup of tea, but after half an hour, Claire had yet to return. I checked her phone's location and discovered she was at the pub around the corner. It wasn't a spot we frequented, as it tended to be noisy with a young crowd. I had considered calling her, but that would spoil the surprise. I headed over to the pub where the noise level was high. Scanning the room, I initially couldn't spot her, but then a sudden movement caught my attention. There she was, with her arms wrapped around the neck of a vaguely familiar man. His hand was bandaged, and they were deeply engrossed in a passionate kiss, reminiscent of the way she used to kiss me. I felt crushed. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and discreetly snapped a couple of photos. A girl near the bar noticed and hurried over to Claire. I didn't stick around to see her reaction. Instead, I turned on my heels and left the pub. As I made my way back to Claire's apartment, I knew I had to start packing. Sending her a copy of the incriminating photo along with a text message, I wrote, "I'll clear out my things so you can make room for his. You know where to send the engagement ring." I returned to her apartment. Since I didn't have any suitcases, I grabbed a black plastic trash bag and began packing my clothes into it. As I was sorting through my belongings in the bathroom, Claire burst in, accompanied by the man she was with. Well, this should be interesting. "Darling, it's not what it seems. It was just a kiss. We were merely kissing. Nothing more. Please, it was just a kiss, forgive me." Fuck off and then fuck off a little more. You're standing there claiming that nothing happened, and yet you bring him here to brag about it in front of me. It's over between us. Who else knows about your deception behind my back? I saw that girl rush over to you, so she must know about your offense. I'm leaving. It was just a kiss, nothing more. A kiss when you hugged his neck. I know what kissing leads to, remember? Have you slept with him yet? No, I wouldn't betray you that way. She maintained eye contact with me. So you practiced on it for me? There was sarcasm in my voice. No, my love, I wouldn't do that. She continued to stare into my eyes. Then I noticed his hand. So it's just handmade? Her eyes darted momentarily, a telltale sign she couldn't hide, likely due to her background in psychology. She must have recognized her slip, but it was too late. She remained silent. Okay, so it's just a hand job because his hand is injured. And you're the reason for the injury, I assume? Right? Her response was a slow nod. So, today is manual work. Next week you will work with his mouth with his tool, and a week later you will drag him to bed. That's the scheme, if I remember correctly. And in case you haven't noticed, he prefers his left hand. It would be a good opportunity for him to learn two-handed. I guess he won't need to practice with his left hand now since he'll have you, won't he? I headed for the door. Then he interjected, "Sorry, man, nothing inappropriate happened, trust me. It was just a kiss, a friendly one. She was apologizing for this." He gestured to his bandaged hand. "She accidentally slammed it in a door last week and fractured some bones. She was just making amends. You don't make amends by swapping saliva and tongues like I saw. And how many times did she pleasure you? There's more to this, and I don't know you. So no, I don't trust you." Then he did something unexpected. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and handed it to me. Just once, and I was desperate. "Look, dude, my phone is wide open. Go through anything. Texts, emails, Instagram, Twitter. You won't find any contact with her. There are a couple of work-related messages, as she works for me, but check them out." I complied, finding nothing suspicious. No suggestive messages, only an apology from her and some work-related conversations. They had met a couple of times, seemingly in group settings from work, not alone. But I still couldn't shake off the discomfort about the kiss. And why hadn't she mentioned she injured some guy's hand in a door? I glanced at her. Would you grant me the same courtesy? Hand over your phone, let me see what's on it. She complied silently, her passcode already familiar to me as mine was to her. I believed we shared no secrets. Turning away, I sifted through her messages, emails, and social media. Aside from a few instances mirroring what I'd found on his phone, there was nothing unusual, except for her having pleasured this man, which was a deal-breaker for me. Then I executed a cunning maneuver. Changing the passcode on her phone, I dialed my number from it. My phone buzzed in response. Retrieving it from my pocket, I silenced the call and set her phone on the table. Gazing at them both, I began to doubt anything beyond the handjob had occurred, yet I had no intention of sticking around. I need time to process this. Hand over the engagement ring. I'll hold on to it for 2 weeks to decide if it returns to your finger or goes back to the jeweler's. Tearfully, she removed the ring and handed it to me. Now, get out of my way. I departed. Outside, I raised the volume on my phone to eavesdrop on their conversation. I'm sorry, Claire, he apologized. I didn't mean to complicate things for you. I do care about you. I never intended to hurt you. But when I mentioned my issues and you offered to assist, I thought you were joking about the handjob. If I had realized you were serious, I wouldn't have accepted. I was just kidding, you idiot. Couldn't you tell? But once you agreed, I felt obligated to follow through. Fair enough, but what about the kiss Michael witnessed? Why did you do that? I do not know. It was impulsive. It was a stupid mistake, especially when everyone was watching in the pub. If Shelley hadn't seen Michael taking the photo and warned me, I wouldn't have checked my phone. The noise there is unbearable. You can't hear anything. Who knows, maybe we got carried away. To tell you the truth, Claire, if you had offered more, I would have agreed. You're great. I forgot about Michael and your engagement. He hesitated before muttering softly, Hey, if Michael is no longer alive, could we, She exploded with anger. Get lost. Take your hand and get out of here. You've already destroyed my marriage and we haven't even gone that far yet. You've messed up my life and now you're offering to pick up where Michael left off. How incredibly insensitive of you. I don't believe there's anything wrong with your hand anyway. I think you're just pretending, so go away. I need to figure out how to win my man back. I need to apologize to him. I need to make things right. And don't you dare mention this at work, or you'll regret it. That was enough for me. I heard the door slam as he left, leaving only the sound of Claire's crying. I ended the call. Nothing had actually happened, but I had a feeling it could have escalated. The real issue was that I was still deeply in love with her. Could I forgive her? Would that kiss have led to more? He suggested it might have, though Claire shut him down. I was uncertain about what steps to take next. Perhaps seeking advice from someone else would be wise, and my parents would be a good choice. Unaware that I had been driving and already halfway home, I decided to stop at a motorway service station and call my mom and dad to explain the situation. I informed them that the wedding was off, though fortunately, we hadn't made significant payments yet, as it was still several months away. They suggested I come over for tea the next day to discuss it further, and reminded me to inform Claire's parents, who were also nice people. Realizing that this wasn't a matter to handle via text, I promptly called Claire's parents, though they were too distant for a visit since I was already halfway home. They were shocked and initially skeptical until I sent them a photograph as proof. Claire's dad urged me to think things through before making any rash decisions. I informed him that I was canceling the wedding for the time being while I contemplated my options, explaining that seeing her with another man had deeply hurt me, and forgiveness would take time. Claire's mom expressed her intention to confront Claire over the phone, but I cautioned that reaching her might be difficult. With that, I left the conversation. Upon arriving home, I headed straight to bed and surprisingly found myself sleeping well, likely due to feeling completely drained physically and emotionally. The next day, I joined my parents for tea, engaging in deep conversations without reaching any conclusions. Dad and I indulged in a bit too much drink, leading me to spend the night in my childhood bed. The morning brought a familiar and comforting breakfast courtesy of Mum. Despite the routine, I remained undecided. Eventually, I made the choice to call off the wedding, spurred by the haunting image of her embracing another man. Throwing myself into work, I resolved to tackle household chores the upcoming weekend, tasks I had neglected amidst all the traveling. Then, on Saturday at noon, the doorbell chimed, revealing Claire's parents with Claire herself in tow. Welcoming them inside, I paused briefly before closing the door on Claire's face, only to reopen it moments later to find her in tears. I needed her to understand that this wouldn't be simple. Her parents conveyed her apologies, insisting it was a mistake that should never have occurred. Claire expressed remorse, saying, "Michael, I deeply regret my actions. It was a mistake. I confessed everything to Mom and Dad, admitting my stupidity. Is there any way I can fix this? It was either a kiss or an unintentional handjob to a strange guy." Her mother's expression turned sad, indicating that she had not been informed of Claire's actions before. I looked at her father. He wasn't surprised, he was aware. I excused myself and retired to the kitchen, allowing them privacy. From there, I heard Claire's mother expressing her displeasure. I brewed coffee for them and made tea for myself, knowing their preference for coffee. I even had a jar of their favorite blend. We engaged in conversation for a while without making any progress. I expressed my distress at witnessing her embracing someone else and being in contact with another person intimately. I confessed uncertainty about how I would move past it. Then Claire took action. She knelt in front of me and said, "I apologize, my love. I acted foolishly and won't repeat that mistake. I'll consider the consequences of my actions from now on. Please forgive me." I glanced at her lovely face, filled with affection. While I can't say for certain what might have transpired, it seemed clear she had no intentions of being intimate with that man, judging from our phone conversation. She acknowledged her mistakes, and while I was inclined to forgive her, our wedding plans were still on hold. I had a few more inquiries. "Who else is aware of your involvement with this man?" "Just my parents, Dean, and a couple of colleagues who witnessed it. I've made it clear to Dean that if he so much as mentions it or comes near me, I'll break his other hand," she replied, causing a disapproving reaction from her mother. "So it seems like half the office knows about our situation," I remarked. "No, only a few people know, and they've assured me they won't spread the news. Besides, I'll be relocating to a different office soon, so I'll be away from them," she explained. "Are you still planning to move down here?" I inquired. "Yes, I have to, even if you don't take me back. The position needs to be filled. But I want to be here with you," she assured. I decided to tease her a bit. "How can I be sure there won't be another incident like this in the future?" She gave me a curious look at the mention of incident. How much did I actually know? At that moment, her father stepped in, maintaining a composed demeanor despite the circumstances. "Listen, son," he said. "My only suggestion is that you won't know if you can trust her until you give it a try. However, the decision is entirely yours. I won't dictate what you should do because you'll have to live with it. But I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive her and reconcile." Clara then reached out her hand to me, but I flinched it away. "Is this the hand you used to please that guy? When was the last time you used it on him?" She burst into tears, and her father glanced at me sympathetically. "That was a bit harsh, buddy, but I see your point." Pulling herself together, Claire stood up and addressed me, saying, "It was just once. I never saw him outside of work again." With that, she hurried to the kitchen, followed by her parents and me. She turned on the cold water tap, reached under the sink for a bottle of bleach, and poured it over her right hand, front and back. After waiting for 5 seconds, she rinsed it under the running water. Turning to me, she held up her hand and declared, "Completely pure now. There's not a trace left. If you take me back, this hand will only ever touch you." I internally acknowledged that the display wasn't too bad, and I was starting to believe her. Grabbing a towel, I handed it to her so she could dry her hands. "I'm not saying you're forgiven yet, but it would be wise for you to come down here next weekend so we can start searching for a flat when you do. I had hoped I could make it up to you by moving in here with you. but I understand where you're coming from." Despite the display with the bleach, I had already made up my mind to forgive her. Although she could have seriously harmed herself, I wasn't going to make things easy for her. She did come down the following weekend, however. Instead of looking at flats, we were too exhausted from spending a lot of time in bed. The next weekend, I visited her place. I wanted to test something, so we went to that pub. A couple of her colleagues were there, but nothing was mentioned. I remained observant, but there were no secretive glances or whispers behind hands. It seemed everyone had kept their promise. We didn't search for an apartment. Instead, she moved in with me. She slipped the engagement ring back onto her finger, and we opted for an autumn wedding rather than one in the spring. Things went smoothly. We settled into the comfortable routine of married life. We visited our parents, enjoyed holidays together. Eventually, we felt it was time to have children before our parents became too old to fully enjoy them or help us by babysitting. She stopped taking birth control pills, and we were intimate like rabbits, trying every position imaginable. However, after 6 months, there was no success. We sought help from a clinic, underwent tests, and fortunately, everything was fine. The clinic advised us that conception might take time due to the stress of trying, work commitments, and other factors. They suggested we not obsess over it and let nature take its course, and so we did. We allowed things to unfold naturally. We were both swamped with work during that period. She was occupied with audits, and we were wrapping up a major aircraft repair for a customer, albeit delayed due to supply issues. I was putting in extra hours to make up for the delay within legal limits. Between work, I barely had time for anything else, including intimacy. This hectic schedule was typical for us during this time of year. But things took a turn when Claire's dad had a heart attack. On my one day off, I went over to help out. I hoped that once things settled down in a couple of weeks, we could reconnect romantically. However, everything changed when I replaced a razor blade. Normally, I don't bother disposing of the old one properly. I just toss it in the trash. As I pushed the pedal and the lid lifted, the old cartridge slipped from my hand and missed the bin. While retrieving it from the floor, I noticed a small piece of cardboard box end cap, a pregnancy kit. I searched through the rest of the trash but couldn't find the rest of the box or the test stick. After finishing shaving, I descended the stairs to find Claire still at home, seated at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee. Placing the end cap in front of her, I inquired, "Where's the rest of this?" "Oh, I threw it out," she replied. "Why didn't you inform me?" I questioned. "It was negative again, and I didn't want to upset you," she explained. Then came my big question. "Why are you taking a pregnancy test? We've only been intimate twice this month. How could you possibly be pregnant?" Her response caught her off guard. She stuttered and coughed before hastily excusing herself, claiming she was late for work, although she wasn't. Concern began to gnaw at me. Was this reminiscent of what happened with Dean, and was it escalating? As I reflected, I searched for any changes in Claire's appearance, demeanor, or behavior, but our busy schedules and her father's illness had consumed much of our attention. I couldn't discern any significant indicators, but I resolved to pay closer attention moving forward. Claire arrived that evening, expressing apologies, acknowledging a miscommunication where she hadn't considered my perspective. She took a pregnancy test, hoping for positive results after previous attempts, but was disappointed when they didn't materialize. She hesitated to share this disappointment with me. She proposed a weekend getaway for just the two of us, suggesting a cozy cottage retreat where she promised to dress provocatively in stockings and 6-inch heels, along with any other lingerie I desired. I agreed, but reminded her of her impending period. She thanked me, realizing her oversight, and rescheduled the weekend trip for the following week to avoid any discomfort. It occurred to me that if her period was imminent, why would she take a pregnancy test? This seemed unusual, as women typically remember their menstrual cycles. Despite her period arriving as expected, I began noticing other peculiarities, such as her leaving tampons out openly, a departure from her usual discretion. Despite these observations, our weekend away was delightful. Claire kept her promise, dressing seductively throughout, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I was searching for signs, but there was still nothing noticeable. No change in behavior or attire. Perhaps there would be more intimacy now that her period was over, but it could also be due to our recent discussions about our lack of intimacy. She wasn't going out with her girlfriends or working late, yet I remained cautious. Things seemed to return to normal, but I remained vigilant. Once a month, her colleagues would gather for drinks after work on a Friday. Nothing too late, just a couple of pints at the local Weatherspoons. Usually I finished work around the time she wanted to head home after a drink or two, so I'd swing by to pick her up. However, this particular Friday, I finished work early, meaning I would arrive earlier than usual. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up, likely because of the noise in the pub. I arrived and saw her colleagues gathered around a table. Claire wasn't among them, nor was her boss, Jeremy. I inquired about Claire's whereabouts from the women at the table and was informed she was in the restroom. When I asked about Jeremy, who usually attended these gatherings, I was told he was outside vaping. Sarah, one of the women, immediately began texting. Shortly after, Claire returned from outside, not from the restroom. Soon after, Jeremy entered through the front door, accessible from the smoking area. As Claire greeted me with a kiss, I caught a faint scent of scented smoke, confirming she hadn't been in the restroom. Unwilling to tolerate this, I addressed everyone loudly. "If I catch you cheating on me, I will divorce you and you will have nothing," I warned, then turning to Jeremy. "And the person involved will regret the day they were born." With that, I turned to leave, but Claire stopped me before I could take a step. I relented and faced her, anticipating an interesting exchange. "Don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues," she pleaded. "Then don't have your friends lie to me. They told me you were in the restroom, but you were actually outside vaping with Dean. I could smell it on you, and I suspect the pregnancy test was to ensure he hadn't gotten you pregnant. So any embarrassment you face is deserved," I stated firmly, eyeing the table where the truth had dawned on them, with Sarah avoiding eye contact. I walked away, and Claire caught up, linking arms with me. "I'm sorry, darling. There's nothing going on. Please trust me," she implored, seemingly unaware that I had mentioned Dean, not Jeremy. Well, that turned out to be a useless reminder that only served to insult. As we exited the pub, I expressed to her, "I once placed my trust in you and forgave you, but I won't do so again." The journey home was chilly, and she spent the weekend trying to make it up to me. I kept a watchful eye on her phone, but found nothing suspicious. If she was involved with Jeremy, they were keeping it discreet. I decided to check her company's website, where I discovered their strict policy against fraternization, particularly between higher-ups and their subordinates, and even those aware of such relationships. This was new to me, but it made me more cautious. If they were still involved, they were now aware of the consequences and would likely anticipate my monitoring. I had to proceed carefully. Nonetheless, I didn't observe anything unusual. I conducted some investigation regarding him. He was married and had 2 children. His wife seemed to be rather plain-looking and a bit overweight. I hadn't met her before, but I'm sure she must have a wonderful personality. I might need to introduce myself to her sometime. Then there was news about a training course, scheduled for 3 days in Telford, where her company was headquartered. I inquired about who was attending. It turned out to be her and one of her colleagues, Kelly. "So Jeremy isn't going?" I inquired. "No, he attended it last year." Despite my suspicions, even after searching online and asking discreet questions, there was no evidence to suggest he was accompanying her. She was set to depart on Sunday afternoon. She mentioned that Kelly would be picking her up. When Kelly arrived at the front door in her car, I surreptitiously placed my phone in my shirt pocket, with the camera facing outward, recording video. I assisted Claire with her suitcase and asked Kelly if I could place it in the trunk. She seemed flustered, but unlocked it nonetheless. There were no other suitcases in the trunk, and the back seat was empty. After Claire got into the car, I crouched down and whispered to her, "If you betray me, I'll find out, and both you and him will suffer consequences, so be warned." Kelly's reaction was telling. She became visibly embarrassed, looking down at her lap, her face flushing red. I turned to Kelly and remarked, "Looks like you didn't pack much, did you?" "I forgot to grab them, and we're heading back to my place to pick them up now," she replied. avoiding eye contact. The rest of the evening was spent bracing myself for the worst. I had previously reached out to their main office to inquire about the hotel reservation they had made. I informed them of my intention to surprise my wife with some flowers for our anniversary. They disclosed the hotel's location to me. However, Claire mentioned she wasn't aware of the hotel because Kelly was driving, which struck me as odd. On Monday, I discreetly passed by Claire's office and Kelly's parked car in the lot. Claire was seated at her desk, not in Telford, as she claimed. I used my phone's camera to capture a picture of her. Though it wasn't of the highest quality, it was unmistakably her. I made sure not to reveal my presence. Having already taken 3 days off, packed my bags, and consulted a lawyer, I was prepared. I decided to call Jeremy's wife, Heather, just to confirm his whereabouts. Pretending to be from their company, I explained that I couldn't reach him at the office. Heather informed me that he was attending a course in Telford. I had encountered Heather a few weeks earlier. Our meeting was coincidental as she was picking up her children from school. Although she had a pleasant demeanor, she seemed not very observant. She didn't notice that I didn't have any children to collect. I casually mentioned that my wife and her husband worked in the same office, which turned out to be a surprising coincidence. During our conversation, I mentioned an upcoming course, only to find out that Jeremy, Heather's husband, coincidentally had plans to be away at the same time. It struck me as odd for both the head and deputy head of a department to be absent simultaneously, unless some arrangement had been made. In truth, I didn't merely happen upon Heather, I made a deliberate effort to meet her. She appeared to be a pleasant woman, though unremarkable in appearance. I noticed that her children attended an expensive private school, which seemed unlikely given Jeremy's income. Her attire suggested affluence. It's unusual to use an Aston Martin DBX SUV for school pickups. I checked into the hotel and sat in the lobby, dressed in attire, quite unlike my usual style, including a baseball cap which I typically dislike wearing indoors, a fact Claire is aware of. On Monday evening, after the day's course had concluded, I observed their arrival. Approximately 20 individuals joined for dinner, dispersed among 4 tables, with Jeremy and Clara noticeably not seated together. Throughout the evening, I observed their interactions, noting their deliberate avoidance of each other's company. This behavior was unexpected, given their shared workplace where one might anticipate at least some interaction. Their avoidance seemed intentional, suggesting a desire to keep their distance discreetly. Contemplating whether their rendezvous would occur in a private room, I noted the hotel's limited layout of 3 floors. Around 9:15, Jeremy departed, prompting me to follow discreetly. After ascending the stairs adjacent to the elevator, I discovered he had entered a room at the far end of the second-floor corridor. Returning downstairs to monitor Claire's departure from the gathering, I noted her exit approximately 20 minutes later. Again ascending the stairs, I found she was on the 3rd floor, conveniently close to the elevator. She didn't stay in her room for long before heading towards the elevator, but I had a sinking feeling she might opt for the stairs instead. Hastily, I descended the stairs as quietly as possible, anticipating her aversion to using the elevator. I glimpsed her emerging onto the 2nd floor and proceeding down the hallway, seemingly towards the same room Jeremy had entered. I followed discreetly and identified the room as 214. Now came the challenging part. I resolved to wait for an hour before knocking on the door, hoping to catch them engaged in work discussions around a laptop. No, let's give them 45 minutes, I told myself. I managed to wait for 35 minutes before finally approaching the room. With my phone's video recording function activated, I placed it in my shirt pocket with the lens facing outward, ensuring it was unobstructed. I slid the envelope I had prepared earlier beneath the door, rapped on it, and called out, "Room service." There was a grumble that sounded like, "Didn't order room service." Moments later, all I heard was a startled expletive when he discovered the photos of him kissing and fondling my wife. I lacked concrete evidence. It was a doctored image using Photoshop. It depicted Claire kissing Dean with Jeremy's face crudely superimposed over Dean's, albeit poorly done. Alongside was an unsigned divorce petition for Claire. The door burst open, revealing Jeremy clad in only a towel, catching sight of his lover's husband standing there. He swung at me, grazing my left cheek with a feeble blow. In contrast, mine was forceful. Rage propelled me as I landed a solid punch on his nose, sending him crumpling to the ground amidst a spray of blood. Ignoring him, I approached my wife, still in bed, clutching the sheets tightly around her. Handing her the envelope containing the signed divorce petition, I uttered, "Don't bother returning home. I've changed the locks, and your belongings are at your parents' place. They're not pleased with you." In truth, they were unaware, but they would soon find out, and their disapproval would persist. With that, I turned and walked away. I proceeded to my room and packed my bag before glancing at myself in the mirror. A noticeable bruise adorned my left eye. Surprisingly, it seemed to fit well with my plans. Making my way through the bar, I passed by reception, where I spotted a man who seemed to hold a managerial air. Engaging him, I inquired, "Are you acquainted with Jeremy?" "Yes, I am." "Why do you ask?" he responded. "Well, it seems Jeremy and Claire might be delayed tomorrow, or perhaps not show up at all." "There seems to have been a disagreement," I explained. He cast a curious glance at my bruised eye. "A disagreement between Claire and Jeremy?" "No, between Jeremy and Claire's husband. That would be me, by the way." The man looked incredulous. "I find that hard to believe. Surely they wouldn't be so foolish?" I retrieved my phone and showed him the video clip of Jeremy opening the door in a towel, hitting me, followed by his nose being squashed and Claire in his bed. I also managed to capture the room number in the footage. He muttered to himself momentarily, then reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "Could you please send a copy of that to this address, and may I have your phone number so I can call you tomorrow morning? This is rather serious." Handing me another business card, he gestured for me to write my number on the back. The atmosphere in the bar behind him had grown noticeably quiet. I anticipated the morning's proceedings to be quite significant. Leaving the bar, I proceeded to the reception desk to check out, an unusual occurrence at 10:30 at night. The receptionist inquired if everything was all right, to which I replied no, explaining that I had discovered my wife in her boss's bed and that he had assaulted me. As I said this, I purposefully glanced at the security camera. I drove straight home in a single stretch, seething with anger. It was directed at myself, her, and Jeremy. I attempted to stop for a nap at a lay-by, but sleep eluded me, so I kept driving. Though I hadn't yet changed the locks, I had a locksmith on standby, whom I texted to prioritize fitting me in. By the time I arrived home, daylight was breaking. I had already packed her clothes meticulously into black bin bags, hoping to have them unpacked before her return. These bags went into the back of my car. Tracking Claire's phone, I found she was halfway down the M5, meaning she wouldn't arrive for a couple more hours due to traffic. I briefly pondered Jeremy's whereabouts but dismissed it quickly. I no longer cared. Initially, I considered dropping off her clothes at her parents' place, but considering her father's recent heart attack, I didn't want to risk stressing him further. Instead, I drove to Claire's office with the intention of leaving them outside. However, finding cleaners inside, I left the bags on the floor by her desk, providing fodder for office gossip once the staff arrived. Upon arriving home, I didn't anticipate the locksmith's arrival for another day or two. So I entered, turned my key in the lock to prevent Claire from using hers, effectively locking her out. Exhausted, I managed a few hours of restless sleep. Suddenly, I was startled awake by loud banging and shouting at the front door. It was Claire, looking disheveled. Spotting me, she pleaded, "Please, darling, it was a mistake. A one-time thing. He promised me a promotion before he leaves, and he'll recommend me for his job. I did it for us." Her words reeked of deceit, evident even through the door. "Rubbish," I retorted. "The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that you betrayed my trust. Please, let me explain. How do you explain the elaborate planning? Coordinating with Kelly, arranging for Jeremy to retake the course, sneaking around in the hotel. This was all premeditated. What else have you planned? How long has this been going on? What else has Kelly covered up for you? We had to plan to avoid getting caught, and it was truly just once, I swear. I don't believe you. How long have you been sleeping with Jeremy? Actually, it doesn't matter. Once is more than enough. I secured the door with the chain before opening it, although she interpreted it as an invitation. It was our only option to converse without raising our voices. So I assume everyone at the office knows about your affair, Kelly and Sarah, and probably everyone else too. Once again, she avoided answering the question. Please, darling, let me explain. The managerial position offers much better pay. It'll provide for us and the baby so much better. Fine. Then explain this. Why were you taking a pregnancy test just days before your period? Considering we only had sex twice that month amidst our busy schedules. You were checking if Jeremy got you pregnant. There was no shock or confusion in her expression, just a downward glance that spoke volumes. Pressing on, I declared, I don't need explanations, I just need you out of my life. You've cheated on me twice and I'm not foolish enough to endure it again. Sign the divorce papers, and let's end this. Her defeated demeanor was palpable. I need some clothes. Can I come pick them up? I left them at your office. The cleaners were kind enough to let me in. I regretfully shut the door in her face, feeling sympathy for her parents. While the incident was still fresh in my mind, I sat down at my computer and drafted a detailed letter recounting the events from my suspicions at the pub, Kelly's involvement in the deception, and the discovery of Jeremy and Claire in compromising circumstances. I attached photos, videos, and the recently recorded audio from my doorstep. I also forwarded a copy to my divorce attorney, anticipating a legal battle from Claire. Claire initially contested the accusations but eventually capitulated when her lawyer presented the evidence likely influenced by her parents. She was subsequently dismissed from her job. Kelly faced similar consequences for her role in the Telford trip, leading to strains in her marriage when her husband learned the reason for her termination. Sarah received a formal reprimand and warning, while the rest of the office received informal warnings. Bonuses for the year were canceled, leading to uncomfortable conversations in many households. Additionally, Sarah's boyfriend ended their relationship. The unexpected confrontation came from Jeremy, whom Heather had divorced. He contested the divorce, alleging that Claire had falsely accused him of misconduct to secure his dismissal and take his job. His strategy was to reconcile with Heather to challenge his termination from the company. The case went to court, a rarity in modern times. I was a witness and recounted what I had seen. Jeremy's wife's attorney presented footage showing Jeremy and Claire together. Jeremy's lawyer attempted to have it dismissed, citing privacy concerns since it was filmed on private property. However, its relevance to the divorce was clear as Heather had already viewed it. Then it occurred to me, if the video evidence could be invalidated, Jeremy could sue the company for wrongful termination. The judge didn't buy it. My amateur status as a videographer and the context of its use for gathering evidence of an affair were decisive factors. The location wasn't private property, and the majority of the footage was taken from outside the room, particularly when Jeremy assaulted me. Claire testified on Heather's behalf. She confessed that Jeremy had misled her into believing that sleeping with him would secure her his job, only to later discover the company's plan to replace him with her regardless. The court proceedings arose after Heather's divorce was finalized. Claire pursued me after the hearing, pleading for a chance to talk. I glanced at her. Despite the trials of divorce evident in the slight weight loss around her face, she retained her beauty in my eyes. Her appearance was impeccable. A pang of sympathy struck me. All right, I could use some coffee after all that, I remarked as I headed toward the door. Swiftly, she caught up to me and looped her arm through mine. It felt comforting, reminiscent of old times. After finding a table, she ordered coffee for herself and tea for me, along with a couple of biscuits. Seated across from each other, she reached for my hand and I allowed it. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. Darling, I'm deeply sorry. I shouldn't have done what I did. There was a hint from headquarters about me possibly getting Jeremy's position, but it remained uncertain. I panicked thinking they had changed their minds, so I took action, believing it was for our future security. You're not at fault, and frankly, he wasn't very competent. She paused to sip her coffee. Can we please try again? I'll do anything. Even if it means you being with another woman. I'll do whatever it takes to win you back. I love you so much. Please allow me to make amends. Please give me another chance. Tears streamed down her face as she tightly clasped my hand, causing discomfort. So let me understand this correctly. You who compromised yourself for a job that was already yours. You were intimately involved with him at work. He was probably receiving more attention than I was. You didn't take precautions. So you could have ended up pregnant by him, which demonstrates how little you value me and our marriage. Just like you did with Dean. You were only concerned about yourself. You probably forgot about me entirely. You enlisted the help of your colleagues to arrange your little getaway to Telford with your lover, who, by the way, was unsatisfactory in bed, and who knows what else they've covered up for you. And let's not overlook the fact that your actions resulted in Kelly losing her job. And from what I've heard, her marriage isn't doing too well either. I suspect her husband is only staying for the sake of the children, and last I heard, Sarah's boyfriend broke up with her. So it wasn't just our lives you ruined, you dragged others down with you. I took a sip of my tea. It tasted awful. Give you another chance. I haven't forgotten what you did with Dean. So should I give you a third chance? What do you think? With that, I stood up, grabbed the Belgian chocolate chip cookie, and left the room. I could hear crying, but I didn't look back. I have nothing but disdain for that woman. A couple of months later, I bumped into Claire's parents at the supermarket. Her father appeared to be in better spirits. They informed me that Claire had relocated to the South Coast after receiving a job offer there. They didn't divulge specifics about her new job or whereabouts, perhaps sensing my lack of interest. We exchanged goodbyes, and as they departed, Claire's mother turned to me and disclosed, "She suffered a miscarriage due to stress. She hasn't seen him since, you know." She paused before adding, "She truly cares about you." Although tempted to respond sarcastically, I refrained. I didn't want to inflict any more pain on these individuals who were already enduring enough. I couldn't help but ponder whether the child was mine or Jeremy's. Rumor has it that Heather's brothers paid Jeremy a visit, leaving him with difficulties walking for a few months. I remained indifferent. As for myself, I simply continued striving to live my best life.